Daniel was 10 years old when he learned that some children were worth more dead than alive, or at least, worth more when they disappeared without a trace. The discovery came on a Tuesday night, 3 weeks before Christmas, in the way most terrible truths arrive, accidentally, quietly, and with no chance of unhearing what you've just learned. He had been sent to the basement as punishment for stealing an extra piece of bread during dinner. The São Pedro orphanage didn't tolerate theft, Director Almeida had said, even when hunger made your stomach fold in on itself. The basement was cold, damp, and filled with the kind of darkness that made you forget what your own hands looked like. But darkness had advantages. From the basement, Daniel could hear everything happening in Director Almeida's office directly above. The floorboards were old, warped by decades of moisture, and sound traveled through the gaps like whispered secrets. That night, he heard 2 men speaking with the director. "The boy Daniel," one of them said. The voice was rough, like gravel scraping against metal. 10 years old, correct? Dark hair, thin build. "Yes," Director Almeida replied. Daniel recognized the false warmth in his voice, the same tone he used when government inspectors visited. No living relatives. No birth certificate. He was found wandering the streets after his parents died in a bus accident 4 years ago. No one has ever asked about him. No one even knows he exists officially. "Perfect," the second man said. This voice was higher, nasal, impatient. "The textile factory in Piranha needs workers his size. Small hands for the machines. Delicate work. He'll fit through spaces the older ones can't reach." Daniel's blood turned cold. He pressed himself against the basement wall, his breath shallow, his heart hammering so loudly he feared they could hear it through the floorboards. "When do you want him transferred?" Director Almeida asked. "Friday morning. Early. Before the other children wake up. We have a van waiting. There are 3 others we're collecting from different locations. They'll all be processed together." Processed. Like packages. Like objects. And the payment. The usual rate, 3,000 reais per child. Cash. Half now, half on delivery. Daniel heard the sound of money being counted, bills rustling like dry leaves. He heard the scrape of a chair, footsteps crossing the floor above, the clink of glasses they were drinking to celebrate the transaction. "To profitable partnerships," one of the men said. They laughed. Daniel pressed his hand against his mouth to keep from making a sound. His whole body trembled, but not from the cold anymore. Tears streamed down his face, hot against his frozen cheeks. Friday morning was 3 days away. He had 72 hours to disappear, or he would become another ghost. Another name whispered among the remaining children until even the memory of him faded into nothing. The basement punishment ended at dawn, as always. Daniel climbed the stairs with his legs shaking, not from spending the night on concrete, but from the knowledge burning in his chest like swallowed fire. He moved through the morning routine like a ghost. Silent breakfast of watered-down oatmeal, classroom lessons taught by a bored volunteer who read from outdated textbooks, afternoon chores scrubbing floors until his knees ached and his hands cracked from cheap detergent. But his mind was somewhere else entirely. He was planning. He observed everything with new eyes. The schedule of the guards, the rotation of the night supervisor, the blind spots in the building where cameras didn't reach, the position of every locked door, every window, every possible exit. The São Pedro orphanage stood on the eastern edge of Curitiba, where the city dissolved into industrial zones and forgotten neighborhoods. Behind the building, separated by 100 meters of overgrown wasteland, ran the Iguaçu River, dark, fast, dangerous. The other children told stories about the river, about boys who had tried to swim across and were found days later, bloated and gray, caught in branches downstream, about currents that could pull you under in seconds, about whirlpools that appeared without warning near the old bridge pilings. Daniel had always been afraid of the river, but now he was more afraid of Friday morning. Over the next 2 days, he prepared in secret. He stole a plastic bag from the kitchen during his dishwashing shift, folding it small and hiding it in the waistband of his pants. He took an extra shirt from the donation bin in the storage room, It was too large, but that meant it would keep him warmer. He found a pair of socks that almost matched and had fewer holes than his current ones. From the garden shed, he stole a small pocket knife that one of the maintenance workers had left behind. The blade was rusty, but it was sharp enough. He saved every scrap of food he could without drawing attention. Pieces of bread wrapped in napkins. An apple with bruises that he tucked into his pillowcase. A handful of crackers from the communal snack basket. And he stole 40 reis, the money he'd earned over 6 months by drawing portraits of other children, selling them for 2 reis each. The money had been hidden inside his mattress, wrapped in a torn piece of cloth. It was everything he had. He also took something he knew he shouldn't, a photograph from Director Almeida's office. He'd been sent there to deliver paperwork from a classroom, and while Almeida was on the phone, Daniel had seen the photograph on the wall. It showed the São Pedro orphanage in the 1960s, when the building was new and the ground still maintained. But what caught his attention was the background. Behind the orphanage, through the trees, the river was clearly visible. And in the middle of that river, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it, was what appeared to be a small island covered in dense vegetation. Daniel had never seen that island in person. From the orphanage yard, the river was too far away, obscured by buildings and overgrown lots. But if the island existed, if it was real, it might be the only place they wouldn't think to search for him. He waited until Almeida left the room to use the bathroom, then quickly removed the photograph from its frame, folded it carefully, and slipped it into his pocket. That night, he returned it to its place, but not before memorizing every detail. The island was real, and it was waiting. On Thursday night, Daniel didn't sleep. He lay in his bunk, listening to the breathing of 23 other children packed into the dormitory, and waited. The room smelled of unwashed bodies, mildew, and the faint chemical scent of the disinfectant they used to mop the floors once a week. Daniel's bunk was against the far wall, third from the bottom in a stack of 3. The boy above him, Carlos, snored softly. The boy below, Andre, muttered in his sleep, fragments of dreams Daniel couldn't understand. The night supervisor, Senor Bento, made his rounds every hour like clockwork. Daniel had memorized the pattern months ago during nights when anxiety kept him awake. 10 o'clock. Bento walked through with his flashlight, the beam cutting across the rows of beds, pausing occasionally when someone shifted or coughed. 11 o'clock. Another pass, faster this time, clearly just going through the motions. Midnight. Slower again, more thorough, as if he suspected someone might be awake. 1 a.m. Quick sweep, then back to his office. 2 a.m. The same. 3 a.m. The final round before his shift ended at 6. At 3:45 a.m., 15 minutes after Bento's final round, Daniel moved. He had dressed before lying down, his stolen shirt layered beneath his orphanage uniform, the socks already on his feet beneath the thin blanket. The plastic bag with his supplies was tucked under his pillow ready. He slid out of bed without making a sound, his bare feet finding the cold floor. Years of living in dormitories had taught him how to move silently, which floorboards creaked, which paths through the room were safe. He grabbed the plastic bag, pulled on his shoes, cheap canvas sneakers that were 2 sizes too small and held together with duct tape, and moved toward the window at the far end of the dormitory. The window had been broken for months. During a fight between 2 older boys, someone had crashed into it, cracking the wooden frame and breaking the latch. Maintenance had never bothered to fix it. The orphanage budget didn't cover things like window repairs when there were more important expenses, like Director Almeida's new car. Daniel had tested the window 3 times over the past 2 days, during moments when he was alone in the dormitory. He knew exactly how much pressure to apply, exactly which angle to push. He pushed now. The window swung outward with a soft creak that sounded, to his terrified ears, like a scream. He froze, every muscle locked, listening for any sign that someone had heard. The dormitory remained silent except for the steady rhythm of sleeping children. Someone coughed. Andre murmured something incomprehensible. Carlos's snoring continued uninterrupted. Daniel climbed through. The drop to the ground was 3 meters. He had measured it by counting bricks. 23 bricks from the window to the ground. each brick roughly 13 centimeters. 3 meters, more or less. He hung from the window ledge for a moment, his arms trembling, then let go. He landed in overgrown grass that cushioned the impact, but his ankles still stung sharply. He rolled to the side, pressing himself against the wall of the building, and froze again. Nothing moved. No lights turned on. No alarm sounded. The orphanage remained dark and sleeping. Daniel allowed himself 3 deep breaths, then ran. The backyard of the orphanage was enclosed by a chain-link fence topped with rusted barbed wire. The fence was old, installed decades ago, and never properly maintained. There was a section near the southeast corner where the metal had separated from a post, creating a gap just wide enough for a small body to squeeze through. Daniel had discovered it 2 years ago while retrieving a soccer ball during a rare outdoor recreation period. He'd never told anyone. In a place like the orphanage, you learned quickly that some secrets were more valuable kept than shared. He ran to the gap now, his breath coming in short gasps, his heart pounding so violently he thought it might break through his ribs. He dropped to his knees and pushed the plastic bag through first, then squeezed his body after it. The jagged edges of the fence scraped against his back, tearing through the fabric of his shirt and drawing blood, but he didn't stop. He pulled himself through, ignoring the pain, focused only on getting to the other side. And then he was out, standing on the other side of the fence, outside the orphanage walls. For the first time in 4 years, he was outside without permission, without supervision, without anyone knowing where he was. The realization hit him like a physical blow. His legs went weak. For a moment, he thought he might collapse right there. But he couldn't stop. Not yet. He grabbed the plastic bag and ran toward the river. The industrial zone at night was a landscape of shadows and distant machinery. Warehouses loomed like sleeping giants, their walls covered in graffiti and rust. Streetlights flickered irregularly, casting pools of sickly yellow light across cracked pavement. Empty lots filled with construction debris and abandoned equipment created a maze of potential hiding places and dead ends. Stray dogs watched him from alleys, their eyes reflecting green in the darkness. One of them, a thin German Shepherd mix with matted fur, followed him for 2 blocks before losing interest and returning to whatever territory it guarded. Daniel ran until his lungs burned, until his 2 small shoes rubbed blisters on his heels, until the muscles in his legs screamed for rest. He ran past closed factories with broken windows, past warehouses with metal doors secured by heavy chains, past parking lots filled with delivery trucks waiting for morning shifts to begin. And always, growing louder with each step, was the sound of the river. The Iguazu River had carved its path through this region for thousands of years, long before the city existed, long before humans had built anything worth remembering. During the dry season, it was merely fast. During the rainy season, like now in late December, it became a torrent. When Daniel finally reached the embankment, he stopped. His chest heaved. His vision swam with exhaustion. Sweat soaked through his clothes despite the cool night air. The river stretched before him, wide and black under the moonless sky. The current moved fast, carrying branches, plastic bottles, pieces of foam, all the debris of human civilization swept south toward distant waterfalls that would eventually carry everything to the Parana River, then to the great expanse of the Rio de la Plata, and finally to the Atlantic Ocean. The sound was constant, overwhelming, a low roar that filled the air and made thinking difficult. Daniel looked back toward the city. Dawn was coming. The eastern sky had begun to lighten, turning from black to deep blue to pale gray. In the distance, he could see lights beginning to appear in windows as the city slowly woke. Soon, Senor Bento would make his 6 a.m. round and discover an empty bed. Soon, Director Almeida would be called from his comfortable apartment. Soon, they would start searching. They would check the usual places first, the storage rooms, the basement, the courtyard. Then they would expand the search to the neighborhood. They would call their contacts in the local police. They would put out alerts. And they would find him if he stayed anywhere accessible. The river was his only chance. But how could he cross? The river was too wide to swim, at least 50 meters from bank to bank, maybe more. The current was too fast to fight against, especially for a 10-year-old boy who had only learned to swim in the orphanage's small, chlorinated pool during the 2 weeks each summer when they opened it. Even in daylight, even with help, crossing would be nearly impossible. Daniel walked along the embankment, searching desperately for something. A boat, a bridge, a fallen tree. Anything that could carry him across to the other side where the city ended and the forest began. The embankment was littered with trash. Discarded tires, broken furniture, rusted shopping carts half buried in mud, the remains of homeless encampments, torn tarps, soaked cardboard, empty bottles. The sky continued to lighten. Time was running out. That's when he saw it. 50 meters downstream, partially hidden by hanging willow branches, was an old fishing boat tied to a rotting wooden post that had been driven into the mud decades ago. The boat was small, barely big enough for 2 people, and it looked like it hadn't been used in years. The wood was swollen with moisture, warped by countless cycles of rain and sun. The paint, once blue, now faded to gray, had peeled away in long strips, revealing dark wood underneath. But it was floating, and it had a rope. Daniel ran to it, his hands shaking as he examined the knot securing the boat to the post. The rope was thick, made of some synthetic material that had held up better than the wood. But the knot was tight, hardened by weather and time, pulled taut by months or years of the boat straining against the current. He tried to loosen it with his fingers, but his hands were too small, too weak. The knot wouldn't budge. He pulled out the pocket knife from his plastic bag. The blade was rusty, the edge uneven, but it was sharp enough to saw through rope if he worked at it long enough. He began cutting. The work was slow. Each fiber resisted, requiring multiple back-and-forth motions to sever. His hands cramped. His arms ached. But he kept sawing, strand by strand, while the sky grew lighter and lighter. Finally, the last fiber separated. The boat lurched as the rope gave way, immediately caught by the current and beginning to drift. Daniel threw the plastic bag into the boat and jumped after it. He landed hard on the wet wooden bottom, his knees slamming into the planks. The boat rocked violently, taking on water from the sudden shift in weight, and for a terrifying moment Daniel thought it would capsize immediately. But it steadied. And then he realized his mistake. There were no oars. The boat began to spin, pulled by the river's momentum, moving faster and faster away from the shore. Daniel grabbed the sides with both hands, his knuckles white, his breath coming in sharp, panic gasps. The current carried him south. Trees rushed past on both banks, their branches reaching out like grasping fingers. The sound of the river became deafening, drowning out even his own thundering heartbeat. Water splashed over the sides, soaking his shoes, his clothes, pooling in the bottom of the boat. Daniel tried to steer using his hands, dragging them through the water like he'd seen in movies. But the river was too strong, too fast. The boat was completely at the current's mercy. He was going to drown. He was going to die before they even had a chance to find him. The boat spun faster. The banks blurred. The world became nothing but rushing water and sky and the terrible certainty that this was how his life would end. And then, through the early morning mist rising off the water, he saw it. An island. It appeared like a ghost, materializing from the fog that clung to the river's surface. The island was covered in dense vegetation that seemed to glow green in the dawnlight, bamboo, ferns, trees he couldn't identify, all growing in wild profusion. The island sat in the middle of the river, exactly where the old photograph had shown it would be. Daniel's boat was heading straight toward it. The current created natural barriers around the island, swirling patterns of water moving in different directions, creating zones where debris collected and rotated endlessly. But there was also a channel, a path through the chaos, where the current pushed directly toward the island's eastern shore. The boat followed that path as if guided by invisible hands. Daniel stopped trying to steer. He simply held on, watching as the island grew larger, closer, more real with each passing second. The boat struck the shore with a violent jolt that threw Daniel forward. His forehead cracked against the wooden bow, sending a burst of pain through his skull and filling his vision with stars. He fell sideways into cold, shallow water, his hands and knees sinking into soft mud. For a long moment, he just lay there, half in the water and half on the muddy bank, coughing and shivering and trying to understand that he was still alive. His head throbbed. His hands were numb from gripping the boat. His entire body shook from cold and exhaustion and delayed terror. But he was alive, and he was on the island. Slowly, Daniel pushed himself to his knees, then to his feet. His legs wobbled. His vision swam. But he was standing. He looked around. The island was larger than it had seemed from a river. Much larger. From shore to shore, it was perhaps 200 meters long and 70 or 80 meters wide. Dense forest covered most of it, bamboo groves that created walls of green, ferns as tall as he was, vines as thick as his wrist, climbing up trees whose trunks disappeared into the canopy above. The air smelled of wet earth and rotting leaves and something else, something green and alive, untouched by the industrial stench of the city. Birds called from hidden branches, their songs sharp and unfamiliar. Something rustled in the undergrowth, too large to be a bird, but Daniel couldn't see what it was. And there, barely visible through the vegetation, perhaps 30 meters inland from where he stood, was a structure. A cabin. Daniel grabbed his plastic bag from the boat, water streaming from his clothes, and walked toward it. The path wasn't marked, but it was there if you knew how to look. The undergrowth had been cleared away in a line roughly 1 meter wide, creating a passage through the dense forest. The clearing was old, years old, judging by the regrowth, but it had been maintained. Recently, branches that would have blocked the path had been cut back. Vines had been trimmed. Someone came to this island regularly. The realization made Daniel's heart race again, but this time not from fear of the river. This time from the uncertainty of not knowing what or who he would find. The cabin appeared suddenly, as if the forest had simply parted to reveal it. It had been built deliberately, carefully, by someone who knew what they were doing. The walls were made of river stones, fitted together with mortar, the kind of construction that could withstand decades of weather. The roof was corrugated metal, covered in a thick layer of moss and small plants that had taken root in the accumulated debris. The door was solid wood, dark with age and moisture, fitted with a simple metal latch. There were no windows, but there were ventilation slits near the roofline, covered with wire mesh to keep out larger animals and insects. The cabin was small, perhaps 4 meters by 5 meters, but it looked solid, permanent. Daniel approached slowly, his hand trembling as he reached for the latch. It wasn't locked. He lifted the latch, feeling the metal cool and slightly rough under his palm. The door swung open. Inside, the cabin was dry, cool, and filled with soft morning light filtering through the ventilation slits and gaps in the roof where the metal sheets didn't quite meet. Dust motes danced in the light beams, creating patterns that shifted and changed as Daniel stepped inside. The interior was simple but complete. Against one wall stood a narrow bed frame made of bamboo, with a thin mattress wrapped in plastic and covered with folded blankets that smelled faintly of mothballs. Beside the bed was a small wooden crate serving as a nightstand, and on top of it sat a battery-powered lantern. Against the opposite wall were shelves made from rough-cut boards supported by metal brackets driven into the stone. The shelves held canned food, beans, vegetables, tuna, peaches, and syrup, all with expiration dates that were still months away. There were also bottles of water, sealed packages of crackers, jars of peanut butter, and several boxes of matches wrapped in plastic bags. In the center of the room sat a small table made from a wooden cable spool, the kind used for industrial wire. 2 chairs surrounded it, both mismatched but sturdy. And on the walls hung drawings. Dozens of them. Childish drawings made with crayons and markers and colored pencils. Houses with smoking chimneys. Families holding hands. Smiling suns. Trees with birds in the branches. Dogs and cats. Stick figures playing games. Each drawing was different, created by different hands, but all of them shared the same quality. They were hopeful, innocent, the kind of drawings children made when they still believed the world could be good. Daniel stood in the center of the cabin, slowly turning to take all in, and felt tears begin to stream down his face. This place had been built for children, hidden from the world, protected by the river. waiting. On the table, placed carefully, as if someone had just set it down and walked away, was a notebook. The cover was plain brown cardboard, slightly warped from humidity, but still intact. The pages were filled with handwriting, multiple styles, multiple pens, multiple years. Daniel picked it up with wet, trembling hands. He sank into one of the chairs and opened the notebook to the first page. The handwriting was childish, uneven but careful. The letters were formed slowly, deliberately, by someone who had been taught to write properly but hadn't had much practice. It read, "My name is Miguel. I am 12 years old. I ran away from the Santa Clara orphanage on June 3, 1987, because they were sending me to a farm where children work until they die. I followed the river for 2 days. I was going to drown, but I found this island. Someone built this place. I don't know who, but they built it for children like me. There is food. There is water. There are blankets. I will stay here until I am strong enough to travel farther. To whoever finds this notebook next, you are safe. You are not alone." Daniel's vision blurred with tears. He wiped his eyes and turned to the next entry. Different handwriting. Different year. "My name is Sophia. I am 9 years old. I escaped from the South Judas orphanage in February 1993. The director was selling us to people who hurt children. I heard an old woman in the market talking about an island in the river where lost children could hide. She drew me a map. I thought it was a fairy tale, but it's real. Thank you to whoever made this place. I stayed here for 3 weeks. The food saved my life. I am leaving now to find the address written on the back of this notebook. Sophia, February 24, 1993. Daniel flipped through more entries, his heart pounding. 1998. My name is Ricardo. I am 13. I found this island after escaping from a factory where they locked us in at night. I don't know how long I'll stay. 2003. My name is Anna. I am 8. I was so scared, but this place made me feel safe. 2007. Carlos. 11. Thank you to whoever keeps bringing food. I saw you from the forest. You didn't see me, but I saw you. You are an old man with white hair. You bring supplies in a small boat. You check the cabin. You leave. Thank you. 2011. Beatrice. 10 years old. I read all the other entries. I am not alone. None of us are alone. 2015. Mateus. 12. The orphanage burned down. I don't know if it was an accident. I escaped during the chaos. This island saved me. On and on the entries continued. Dozens of children. Different years. Different stories. But all connected by the same thread: desperate need, accidental discovery, life-saving refuge. And then, at the very end of the notebook, on the last page with writing, Daniel found something that made his breath stop. A letter, written in adult handwriting that was shaky but still precise, dated just 3 months ago, September 2024. To the child who finds this refuge. My name is Dr. Eduardo Santos. I am 78 years old. I built this island refuge in 1985, exactly 39 years ago. I built it because my son, Gabriel, disappeared from the São Vicente orphanage when he was 9 years old. I searched for him for 3 years. I found his body in a mass grave on a farm in Parana, along with 17 other children who had been worked to death. I could not save Gabriel, but I swore I would save others. I purchased this island quietly through intermediaries, so no records would connect it to me. I built this cabin with my own hands, carrying stones from the riverbank, cutting bamboo from a forest. I stocked it with supplies. I have maintained it for nearly 4 decades. Every month, I come here. I bring food. I bring water. I bring blankets. I check the notebook to see if anyone has found refuge here. Over the years, 43 children have left entries in this book. 43 lives saved. But I am old now. My hands shake. My vision is failing. I don't know how many more trips I can make to this island. If you are reading this, you have found safety. The supplies will last for weeks. The river protects you from those who might search. But you cannot stay here forever. On the back of this letter is an address in Curitiba, Casa de Esperanca. It is a shelter run by people I trust, people who have dedicated their lives to protecting children that the system has abandoned. When you feel strong enough, when you are ready, go there. Tell them Dr. Santos sent you. Show them this letter. They will help you. But more than that, they will show you the truth. You are not the only child who has been abandoned by adults who should have protected you. There are thousands. And there is a network, a secret network of people who have been fighting for decades to save as many as we can. This island is part of that network. Casa de Esperanca is part of that network. And if you choose, you can become part of it too. You can help save others the way this island saved you. Welcome to the beginning of your new life, child. You are no longer alone. Dr. Eduardo Santos, September 15th, 2024. P.S. In the wooden crate beneath the bed, you will find dry clothes, a first aid kit, and enough money to reach the city safely. Take what you need. It is yours. Daniel finished reading and sat in silence for a long moment, the letter trembling in his hands. Then he carefully turned it over. On the back, written in the same shaky handwriting, was an address. Casa de Esperanca, Rua das Flores, 847 Barro, São Francisco, Curitiba, Paraná. And below it, a phone number. Daniel looked around the cabin again, at the drawings on the walls, at the carefully stocked shelves, at the bed waiting for whoever needed it. This place had been built with love, built by a father who couldn't save his own son, but had spent 40 years saving others. Daniel stood and walked to the bed. He lifted the mattress and found the wooden crate underneath, exactly where the letter said it would be. Inside were clothes, t-shirts, pants, underwear, socks, all in various sizes for different children. A complete first aid kit with bandages, antiseptic, pain medication. And wrapped in a plastic bag, 1,000 reais in cash. Daniel pulled out clothes that fit, changed out of his wet orphanage uniform, and dressed in clean, dry fabric that felt like a gift from heaven. He found the first aid kit and cleaned the scrape on his forehead where he'd hit the boat, applying antiseptic that stung sharply. Then he sat on the bed, wrapped in one of the blankets, and let himself feel everything he'd been holding back since the moment he'd overheard that conversation in Director Almeida's office. He cried for the fear. He cried for the exhaustion. He cried for his parents, dead for years, but still missed every single day. He cried for Gabriel Santos, the boy whose death had created this refuge. And he cried from relief, pure, overwhelming relief that he was safe, that he had found this place, that he was not going to be sold to a factory and worked until his body gave out. Outside, the sun rose fully, warming the air, drying the moisture from the cabin's metal roof. Birds continued their morning songs. The river continued its endless journey south. Daniel lay down on the bed, still wrapped in the blanket, and for the first time in 3 days, he slept. He slept deeply, dreamlessly, the sleep of someone who had been running on fear and adrenaline and had finally found a place safe enough to rest. When he woke, the sun was high and hot. He had slept for hours. He ate from the canned food, beans straight from the can, peaches and syrup, crackers with peanut butter. He drank bottled water and felt strength slowly returning to his body. Then he explored the island. Beyond the cabin, the forest grew thick and wild. But there were signs of human activity if you knew where to look. Paths that had been cleared, trees marked with small strips of faded cloth, creating a trail that circled the entire island. He followed the trail and discovered that the island was shaped like a teardrop, widest on the northern end where the cabin sat, narrowing to a point on the southern end where the current was fastest. On the western shore, he found another small clearing with a fire pit made of stones and the remains of old campfires, ash and charred wood that told stories of other children who had cooked meals here, who had sat by firelight and felt safe for a while. Near the southern point, he found something that made his heart ache, a small garden, now overgrown, but still showing signs of deliberate planting. Someone, probably Dr. Santos, had planted herbs and vegetables here years ago. Some had gone wild. Others had died. But a few still grew. Tomatoes, small and red. Basil, fragrant and green. Peppers, bright and hot. Daniel picked a tomato and ate it right there, the juice running down his chin, the taste so fresh and alive it made him want to cry again. He stayed on the island for 5 days. Each day, he grew stronger. He ate the food. He slept on the bed. He read and reread the entries in the notebook, feeling connected to all the children who had come before him. He wrote his own entry. My name is Daniel. I am 10 years old. I escaped from the Sao Pedro orphanage on December 20th, 2024, because Director Almeida was going to sell me to a textile factory. I found this island by following an old photograph. Dr. Santos, if you are reading this, thank you. You saved my life. I will go to Casa de Esperanza, and I will help save others. I promise. Daniel, December 25th, 2024. On the morning of the 6th day, Daniel packed the money and some extra food into a plastic bag, put on the cleanest clothes from a crate, and prepared to leave. He stood at the eastern shore where his boat still rested, half pulled onto the muddy bank. The river was calmer today, the current steady but not violent. He pushed the boat back into the water, climbed in, and used a long bamboo pole he'd cut from the forest to guide himself into the current. This time, he knew where he was going. The river carried him downstream, past industrial zones and favelas and parks, until he reached a section where the bank was accessible and the water shallow enough to wade ashore. He pulled the boat onto the bank, abandoned it there, and walked into the city. It took him 3 hours to find Rua das Flores. Casa de Esperanza was a large house painted yellow, with a garden in front and children's voices coming from inside. Daniel stood at the gate for a long moment, gathering his courage. Then he opened it and walked up the path. A woman answered his knock. She was perhaps 50 years old, with gray hair pulled back in a braid and eyes that radiated warmth. "Can I help you?" she asked gently. Daniel pulled out Dr. Santos's letter and handed it to her. She read it carefully, her expression changing from curiosity to understanding to something that looked like relief. When she finished, she looked at Daniel with tears in her eyes. "Dr. Santos sent you," she said softly. "Come in, child. You're safe now. You're home." She led him inside, where other children were eating lunch around a long table. They looked up as he entered, their faces curious but welcoming. "Everyone," the woman said, "this is Daniel. He found the island." The children erupted in excited voices, asking questions, pulling out a chair for him, filling a plate with food. And for the first time since his parents died, Daniel felt like he belonged somewhere. That night, after dinner, the woman, whose name was Teresa, sat with him in a quiet room and explained everything. Casa de Esperanza was part of a network that had existed for 40 years, protecting children who fell through the cracks of the system. Dr. Santos had founded it after losing Gabriel. But he wasn't alone. There were lawyers, social workers, former orphans, families willing to adopt, all working in secret to rescue children from trafficking, abuse, and exploitation. "You're not the first child to find the island," Teresa said, "and you won't be the last. But you are special, Daniel, because you found it at exactly the right time." "What do you mean?" he asked. She handed him a newspaper from that morning. The headline read, "Major Child Trafficking Network Dismantled. Sao Pedro Orphanage Director Arrested." Daniel's hands shook as he read the article. Director Almeida had been arrested along with 15 others. The textile factory in Parana had been raided. Dozens of children had been rescued. "How?" Daniel whispered. Teresa smiled. "Dr. Santos made a phone call after he received your notebook entry. We've been gathering evidence against Almeida for 2 years. Your escape was the final piece we needed. When you disappeared, Almeida panicked. He made mistakes. And we were watching." She leaned forward. "Daniel, you didn't just save yourself. You saved all of them." Daniel looked at the photograph in the newspaper. Children being let out of the factory, thin and tired, but alive. He thought of the island, of the cabin, of Dr. Santos carrying stones from the riverbank 40 years ago, building a refuge because he couldn't save his own son, but refused to let that stop him from saving others. And Daniel understood. His story wasn't over. It was just beginning. "I want to help," he said firmly. "I want to be part of this. I want to save others the way the island saved me." Teresa's eyes filled with tears. She reached out and took his hand. Then, welcome to the network, Daniel. Welcome home. Outside, the river continued flowing south, carrying the past away, bringing the future closer with every passing moment. And on a hidden island in the middle of that river, a cabin waited patiently for the next child who would need it, maintained by an old man with shaking hands who refused to stop fighting, who refused to let even one more child disappear without someone trying to save him. Some places are built not to trap, but to set free. And some children, once freed, choose to become the ones who open doors for others. Daniel was one of them.